Business AM. Think forward.
A warm welcome here at Business AM Radio. I'm Sophie Sonk. The following hour consists of a dedicated talk with the advisor of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Mr. Yuri Sak. Welcome, Mr. Sak. I will start with the first...
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mr. Sak, it has almost been a year since the invasion in your country took place. But before that, Russia invaded the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. Why is Russia so eager to finish the job and take back all of the Ukraine? Could you sketch out a little of the history that's built up to the current war?
Well, we'll have to look back a couple of centuries, and if we analyze the way that Ukrainian people lived throughout their existence, we've always been a freedom-loving, very joyful, peaceful nation. We have never been aggressive towards our neighbors. We have never invaded foreign countries. Maybe this is why our neighbors sometimes were, in particular Russia, they were frustrated, that we are so freedom-loving. Mm-hmm. And I am deliberately trying to oversimplify this story, but the fact remains that Ukraine's longing for freedom is probably one of the major factors that was always a bone in Russia's throat. Now, if you look back even at like 18th, 19th century, Russian Empire first, and then the Soviet evil empire, they were deliberately trying to destroy the freedom of Ukrainian people. They were banning our language. They were destroying our culture. And, this story of Russia's aggressive attitudes towards Ukraine, mm-hmm. It did not begin in 2014. I mean, there were periods when in particular, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a short period, as it turned out, when Russia seemed to be being transformed and they seemed to behave like a civilized member of the international community. And on paper and in their public statements, they were members of reputable international organizations. They were publicly saying that they respect the sovereignty and independence of their neighbors. But in reality, what we understand now, all that time they were harboring this attitude towards our freedom, this aggressiveness towards Ukraine. And this resulted, of course, in 2014 in the annexation of Crimea and Russia's meddling and participation in the hostilities in Donbass.
But in 1954, you were still friends when the Crimea Peninsula was given to you. You started out as friends. The freedom of Ukraine is very important. Is it a necessity for most of the Ukrainian population to be free?
Well, in 1954, the date to which you are referring, thousands of Ukrainians, those representatives of the Ukrainian cultural elite, they were actually rotting in Soviet jails. They would be put in prison exactly because of their longing for freedom. So while it seemed as it was a fairly amicable period in our mutual history, it wasn't. And as for your question, whether freedom is important for every Ukrainian, I would definitely say yes, because if you look at the polls, most recent polls, the vast majority of Ukrainians are now in favor of, Ukrainian Euro integration strategy, in favor of Ukraine's freedom. And the vast majority say very straightforwardly that, we have to continue to fight for our freedom and not negotiate with the terrorists.
Yeah. How difficult is it to have a divided population that is partly Ukrainian and partly Russian, who has the majority in modern Ukraine? And why does it give so many tensions between both sides?
This demographic composition of our country is sometimes very misleading. But what we can say with certainty that even if there were some people in Ukraine prior to February 24 of 2022, who were kind of in favor of building closer relationships with Russia, after the first missiles have struck the predominantly Russian-speaking cities, such as Kharkiv, such as Chernihiv, right now, if you go and ask any Ukrainian anywhere in the, even in the temporarily occupied territories, nobody wants to be friends with Russia because everybody looks at Russia as a terrorist state, as an aggressor who is trying to destroy us.
But there are still Ukrainians fighting for the Russians because some of them still want to belong to Russia. You deny it, but maybe it's still a little bit true that some Ukrainians want to belong to Russia. How important is their role in the current war?
Well, it is difficult to say because, since 2014, you remember that there were fake referendums held and fake republics of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. They were kind of established. But, and it is difficult to say. They participate in the war on the side of Russia. They have been subject and target of very aggressive propaganda throughout years, and in particular after 2014. Of course, there are people in Crimea as well who were victim of that propaganda as well. And we understand the challenge that will lie ahead of us after we win this war. But we are confident that we will find a mutual, language with our compatriots who live currently on the temporarily occupied territory, and Ukraine will be united. That's no doubt about that.
And what is the strong point at this moment of the Ukrainian forces? They've been fighting for over a year, or are they still on the winning side, in your opinion? Is there still some hope?
Well, let's remember that this is an aggressive war which Russia was hoping to end within 3 days. Okay, they were planning to have a military parade in Ukraine after the beginning of the invasion, maximum in 1 week. Now, like you rightly say, it's almost 1 year since the beginning of this large-scale invasion, and we are not just still standing. We were able to eject the enemy from first Kyiv and Kyiv region, Chernihiv and Chernihiv region. Then we had a tremendously successful counteroffensive operation in Kharkiv. We've repelled the enemy from there. Then we've liberated Kherson. And one thing you have to understand that for the last 6 months, the only place that Russians were able to actually gain control of are the ruins of a very small city, almost a village of Soledar. So Russians are demoralized. They are dying by the thousands. The partial mobilization, so-called, it didn't work. So they are, humiliated on the battlefield, and the whole world sees that the Ukrainian army is, delivering on the battlefield and is capable of winning and will win.
Okay. Which side of the front line is the most vulnerable at this moment?
At this moment, of course, the vast majority of the enemy's efforts are focused on the city of Bakhmut and in and around Bakhmut. This is because, one of the objectives of the aggressor is to gain control of Luhansk and Donetsk region. But we are fighting very fiercely, and we are defending the city of Bakhmut. The city of Bakhmut, they were fighting for it for more than 8 months now.
Yeah.
And the amount of Russian soldiers who have already died there and are likely to die more, it's staggering. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So these Russians have no regard for human life. Russians are throwing untrained and poorly prepared soldiers, newly mobilized soldiers, to the battlefield as cannon fodder, and they hope that this will give them a military advantage. Yeah. It doesn't give them a military advantage. It just shows that they are inhuman and, they are just vile.
And is that one of their weak points as well? Is there any strength in the Russian army at this moment?
If we want to be balanced, and I don't want to come across as, similar to Russian propagandists, of course, we understand that Russians, since the beginning of this large-scale invasion, they have been learning as well how to fight. And for example, in recent days, we are seeing that they're changing tactics when it comes to the missile strikes at Ukraine. Just yesterday and the day before yesterday, they were launching, for example, these deflector balloons in the sky because they're trying to find a way to outsmart our air defense systems. And the similar point can be made about their military tactics actually on the front lines. If before they would use large military units and this would result in their destruction, right now they are in most cases working in smaller groups, and this kind of demonstrates that they are making some conclusions from their mistakes and they're trying to learn, but they will not be able to learn fast enough for the Ukrainian army.
No, we will talk about this tactics later of Putin, because he's using also mental tactics. How is the mental state of the soldiers at this moment, from your side?
From our side, everybody is super highly motivated because we understand that we are fighting a war for our survival. We are fighting a war for our freedom, our future, and we understand as well that we are fighting a war for the European freedom and future. Mm-hmm. And our allies understand that as well. And this is why we continue to receive the military support, because de facto, we are right now defending the eastern flank of NATO. And our allies understand that very, very well.
Yeah, we will come back to that state of the war at this moment, but we're leaving this chat for a little while, and we will be back shortly with you, Mr. Yuri Sak.
Business AM. Think forward.
We are back with Mr. Yuri Sak, advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and we're still discussing the ongoing war in the Ukraine. In today's war, Putin seems to cherry-pick certain pages out of Ukrainian history, Mr. Sak. For instance, he's been calling your people fascists and Nazis systematically. And this is a strategy to denounce also the Ukrainian army as fascists. I don't think the Russians are fighting fascists once more. So what is the strategy behind this?
I'm sure you understand that Kremlin needs to somehow sell this unthinkably stupid, unsustainable, and aggressive war to their own people. They need more soldiers, they need to conduct mobilization, and of course to sell this nonsensical war to their own people, they needed to create an image of an enemy that will be understood to all ordinary Russians. And of course, considering Russia's history, the enemy that was most easily available for the mindset of an average Russian is, of course, the Nazi, because because of the Second World War. So the Kremlin has tried to create an image of Russian people again fighting Nazis, because if Russian people, Kremlin thought, would believe this, they would not ask questions about, why they have to go to this war and why they have to all of a sudden fight with Ukrainians, with whom they were fighting shoulder to shoulder during the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, this concept of Ukraine being a Nazi state, it's so ridiculous, it's beyond explanation and comprehension. Ukraine is a country, which is run by a president who is a Jew. And this is like, it doesn't make sense, right? That's just one of the things. But Ukraine, first of all, is a country which is run by patriots. And Ukraine is a country which, during the Second World War, millions of Ukrainians died defending Ukraine and then Soviet Union from the Russian invasion. Yeah. I apologize, from the Nazi invasion. Mm-hmm. So to say that today Ukraine is a Nazi is an absolutely ridiculous, and nobody believes it. Yeah. If you
Putin also mentioned Stepan Bandera. Could you tell us a little bit more about this man? He was the Ukrainian far-right leader of the radical militant wing of the organization UNBI. Putin seems to misuse the ideology of this man to refer to Nazis in the Ukraine, just like his comments on the regiment Azov, the Azov battalion. Can you explain a little bit?
We have to probably first mention the fact that, like I said, throughout centuries of our history, there were Ukrainian people who knew very well that Russia was always a threat. So there were Cossacks who were fighting Russian Empire back in the 18th and 19th century. And of course, when the Soviet Union was created, there were parts of the Ukrainian society that believed that Russia, the reincarnated Russian Empire in the form of the Soviet Union, still presented a threat. So during the Second World War, while Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and was fighting against the Nazi regime, there were also those people who simultaneously were fighting against the yoke of the Soviet Empire. And, I'm not a great expert on the biography of Stepan Bandera, but Stepan Bandera was somebody who was a patriot of Ukraine, and he was fighting against the domination of Russia and against Russians' intentions to destroy the Ukrainian nation. And what we have to remember that in 1933, the Soviet Union has created a man-made famine, the so-called Holodomor, during which more than 3 million Ukrainians were starved by the Soviet regime to death just because they loved freedom and they wanted to have their own identity and culture and live their own way of life. So it is not surprising that the sort of anti-Russian or rather pro-Ukrainian sentiment was always present in the Ukrainian elites.
You mentioned it before, Putin needs his sheep without asking questions, but it seems to work. The denouncing seems to work. Where Russians and Ukrainians once were brothers, the brotherhood is now shattered totally. In Russia, state media, Ukrainians are depicted as bad people, and it seems like your country started the war. From the Russian point of view, of course, and the Russian people believe it all. How is that possible?
I think this is the direct outcome and result of years of propaganda. There is no other way to explain it. We are seeing that, Russians seems to be employing a strategy. They think probably that they can outsuffer the Ukrainian army. They can outdie the Ukrainian army. But this, of course, is not going to work. But because we are seeing that even the infamous Wagner Group, which is, spoken about very often these days, these terrorists, the Wagner Group, they have stopped now recruiting from the Russian prisons, which they did for a couple of months before that. And the reason why they stopped recruiting from the prisons is because even inmates, those who are convicted for serious crimes, serial killers, rapists who used to go and fight for Wagner, even they understand now that, look, this is not a war that we should be fighting. This is a slaughterhouse, and we will be sent as cannon fodder to fight without proper training. We hear that in some training centers, these newly mobilized get as little as 2 to 3 maximum weeks of training before they are sent to die. And this is why, if you look at the statistics, they're dying on average 800-900 a day. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Going back to the Ukrainian point of view, what is the need of the Ukrainian army right now?
This war is unprecedented in its scale. This war is the largest war since the end of the Second World War, which means that it is a very high intensity warfare. Now, the amount of weaponry that is used on a daily basis, the amount of heavy artillery, the amount of air defense systems on both sides is very, very significant. So if you look at the priorities that we have, of course, the priorities remain the continued supply of ammunition for our artillery. Right now, we badly need main battle tanks and armored vehicles because they will be essential and critical for our spring counteroffensive, which we will use to liberate Ukrainian lands from the aggressor. And of course, as our president and as our minister of defense kept saying for the last couple of weeks, we need also fighter jets, Western standard fighter jets, because for us, and this is something that our Commander-in-Chief, Mr. General Zaluzhny, has said recently, victory will mean not only liberating Ukrainian land from the aggressor, it will also mean establishing a Ukrainian army that will be capable of ensuring that such aggressions don't happen in the future. And this is in the interest of the whole of the European continent.
Well, are there new recruitments among the Ukraine army? And how do they get trained?
The Ukrainian army at the moment is going through a regular, replenishment. Newly mobilized people are arriving on schedule, but they are arriving now. For example, we are receiving a lot of new Western standard weaponry, so there is a need to train new soldiers will be able to use this type of weaponry. But overall, the Ukrainian army is now very well staffed. There is no shortage and there is no panic mobilizations at all.
Is the training longer than 2-3 weeks like the Russians?
Yeah, well, ordinarily, of course, they will be sent to training camps and they will receive proper training, which is definitely not 2 or 3 weeks.
And can the war be won by the Ukraine?
The war will be won. There is no doubt about this whatsoever. We don't doubt it. Our allies don't doubt it. And, this is actually the narrative that the Kremlin wants everybody to believe. What the Kremlin kept saying for a couple of months now is that Ukraine is never going to win this war. So why support Ukraine militarily? Why send tanks to Ukraine? Why send fighter jets? This is because the Kremlin is afraid. The Kremlin understands. The Kremlin looks at the battlefield and they understand that they stand no chance. They understand that on the battlefield, Ukraine will defeat them, hopefully in 2023. And, this is why they're spreading these narratives. But trust me, we will win.
Okay, we will leave this conversation just for a minute and we will be back with you shortly, Mr. Sak.
Thank you.
Business AM. Think forward.
We are back with Mr. Yuri Sak, advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and we continue to discuss the ongoing war in the Ukraine. As the war proceeds, many people in the West wonder why haven't the Russians bombed the parliament in Kiev and all of the government buildings along with it? This could have changed the war significantly.
Well, this is exactly the question that most of the Russian propagandists are shouting about almost on a daily basis. What we have to understand is that Kyiv has been the target of missile strikes. Every missile strike that took place up until now, there were missiles that were shot down above Kyiv or on the approaches to Kyiv in the Kyiv region. So thanks to our air defense systems, these missiles, the vast majority of them have been shot down. But, we never know if some of them were not meant to hit the so-called decision-making centers. So that's, one of the considerations. The second consideration is that it is very likely that, despite of all of the bravado displayed on the international arena by Kremlin, they understand that there are certain things that they should not be doing. And they have been sent a very clear message from the Western countries that if they cross the so-called red lines, the consequences for the Russia will be catastrophic. So we understand that, these discussions are continuing in the Russian propaganda sphere, but at the same time, we also understand that Russian leadership is very well aware of the possible catastrophic consequences if they consider something as serious as, attacking certain governmental buildings, for example, in Ukraine, or decision-making centers.
So what is the military strategy of the Russians? Because the focus is on power plants and it hits Ukraine very hard. People are freezing and are very cold. What are they doing?
The military strategy of Russia is terrorism. Russia is trying to use terror as a weapon because they are unable to achieve any military success on the battlefield. So they are using terror to essentially cover up their impotence on the battlefield. This is why we're seeing these massive missile strikes. This is why they were trying to use these strikes to deprive ordinary Ukrainian people, children, even from electricity, to disrupt water supply. So this is their strategy. Terrorism, but it is also combined with panic because they understand that time is going by. They are not achieving any military success. So these panic missiles attacks sometimes are very difficult to comprehend from the military perspective. But, we understand that they hope that by this terror, they will be able to break the will of the Ukrainian people. And this is where they are in for a surprise because no matter what they do, they will never break the will of the Ukrainian people and our longing for freedom. We'll continue to fight until we win.
Okay, at this moment, the war seems stuck in the east. Is this due to the resilience of the Ukraine army, or is this a tactic as well? We keep the eastern front line and we're safe because our defense control the air. We can beat the drone attacks and guided missiles attack. Is that your strategy?
Our strategy is the complete deoccupation of Ukrainian territories and liberation of Ukrainian cities and people. This is our strategy. Now, the nuances, how that is done, are decided exclusively by the general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine. And of course, they are not revealed to the public before they happen for the military reasons, for the security reasons. But it is not really accurate to say that right now the war is only in the east of Ukraine, because daily missile attacks, like yesterday, there were attacks on western Ukrainian cities tonight. Okay, so the air raid sirens, which we hear on a daily basis, they affect every region in Ukraine without exception. So while the most fierce hostilities and the sort of positional fighting is taking place in the east, you're right, the war is affecting the whole of Ukraine. But our strategy is, of course, to continue receiving the military support from our Western allies to improve our air defense systems so that we are able to even better protect the Ukrainian skies. Because, for example, last night, they have launched 36 missiles at Ukraine, and we were able to shoot down 14 of them. So that means that some critical infrastructure objects have been targeted and hit, and this will, of course, result in certain disruptions. But overall, our strategy is victory.
Okay. What are the so-called red lines that a Russian cannot cross? Does they mean they are still a safety net for the Ukraine from losing the war? Like, for instance, bombing the parliament?
There is one key red line which Russia has crossed already on February 24th, 2022. They have attempted to destroy the rule-based international order. They have violated every international rule on the book. They have committed every type of war crime and atrocity on our land. They have killed our civilian people. They have destroyed our cities. So when we speak about red lines, there is no red lines left for Russia to cross. They have crossed every red line possible. But at the same time, of course, there is from time to time, there is concern that, will Russia use nuclear weapons? Now, we hope that they will not use nuclear weapons, because this will be for them the end of Russia as we know it, and they understand this. And our allies, the United States of America, the European countries, they have all said it very clearly that, if Russia thinks about doing something as this will be the end of Russia, because the consequences of such a decision for them will be catastrophic. And we are, confident that they understand this.
Yeah, talking about Western military help, is it working out well for Ukraine?
Well, absolutely. From the first day of this large-scale invasion, Ukrainian armed forces have been using the weapon systems that were supplied to us by our partners very, very efficiently. First, during the first weeks of the war, it was critical that we were supplied with the anti-tank weapons such as handheld manpads and, things like Stingers and Javelins. These weapons were very, very important during the first period of the war. Then we were supplied Bayraktar drones by Turkey, and they were very important in terms of destroying Russian military equipment and personnel. Now, in the summer, there was another critical point, a milestone, when Ukraine received the so-called HIMARS systems, the multi-launch rocket systems. They've been very, very efficient. And now we are working on creating a tank coalition and a fighter jet coalition, which we hope will happen soon as well.
And would military planes be an important factor in this kind of war?
Absolutely. I speak with the Ukrainian pilots on a daily basis. Those who are active duty pilots, those who on a daily basis get into these Soviet-style MiG-29s, and they protect the Ukrainian skies. They shoot down Russian cruise missiles. And the pilots tell me, and our military and political command knows this, that getting fighter jets is instrumental for increasing the military capability of Ukraine and speeding up the victory.
Mm-hmm. The tanks will be delivered in 3-4 months. What is the future going to be for the Ukraine army?
Well, the tank coalition consists of a number of countries, and it is not accurate to say that the tanks will arrive in 3 to 4 months, because some of them will arrive sooner. Mm-hmm. And we have heard statements by Germany, by Netherlands, by Poland, by other countries. So I think the number of tanks, the number of Western tanks in Ukraine will continue to grow incrementally. And of course, we are preparing for the next battles, for our counteroffensive. And our Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, yesterday said that right now we need 2 to 3 months to prepare for the counteroffensive that will result in liberation of Ukraine from the enemy.
Mm-hmm. And how is the morale of the troops at this moment? Do they need a break? Can they get a break?
Well, where necessary, they get a break. There is a rotational principle involved. So, and the morale overall is very high. Like I said before, everybody understands that, this is a war of survival. And just to give you an example, right now, there are Ukrainian servicemen who are training as tank pilots in Germany, in Poland, and other countries. And we have heard feedback from those foreign trainers who teach them that the Ukrainian soldiers are so highly motivated that the foreign trainers have to kind of calm them down and stop training for today. It's incredible. This is one of the key ingredients of our success. We are super motivated to win.
Mm-hmm. What will the tactics be of the war this year? Different than last year?
I will just have to repeat that, the tactics are decided exclusively by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and they're not revealed in advance. But, little by little, we will continue our counteroffensive. We will continue to defend our land. We will continue to improve our military capability. And we hope that in 2023, we will win this war. And, we will force Russia to stand trial, to pay reparations, and to bring them to account for the war crimes that they have committed.
And spring is coming up. Is that going to help?
We are fighting this war since 2014, which means that the Ukrainian army has experience in fighting this war during different times of year. Every time of year, of course, has their own nuances. But what we have to just bear in mind is that we need 2 to 3 months to prepare our counteroffensive, and this is what is going to happen. In the meantime, we will continue to do what we're doing on a daily basis, destroy the enemy and push them out from our cities meter by meter, city by city.
And how is that rotation works with the soldiers?
Well, this is something that is also done regularly and systematically by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So, troops are relocated from one part of the front line to another. Where necessary, soldiers get a couple of days off. They can go and travel, visit their families, recuperate, rest, and then come back to fight. But look, this is going back to your question about motivation. The vast majority of Ukrainian soldiers who are, for example, wounded on the battlefield and they are in a hospital, they want to recover soon so that they can go back to the battlefield. This is how highly motivated we are.
Okay, we're leaving the conversation for just a minute, Mr. Saka. We will be back shortly with you.
All right, thank you.
Business AM. Think forward.
We are back with Mr. Yuri Sak, advisor to the Minister of Defense of the Ukraine. And in this last part of this Business AM special on the war in the Ukraine, we're discussing the current state of situation in the Ukraine and the war. Isn't the West partly responsible for the Russian invasion? Some critics are convinced that the West kept cornering Putin in a defense corner so that in 2014 he said enough. How do Ukrainians see this?
Now, with all due respect, but the narrative that this war was provoked by the West is 100% Russian propaganda narrative. So I'm actually quite surprised that you are asking this question. But since you've asked it, I will give you an answer. Now, and I will answer this question by drawing an analogy. It is almost the same as to say that, a rapist, a serial rapist, should be justified because he was provoked by those ladies who were wearing short skirts. You see, my point is that this is another fake narrative that was put forward by Russia. How was it possible for the West to provoke? What, did the West attack Russia? No, this is a pure, unprovoked aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And this is the end of this discussion. I mean, there's nothing else to add.
Mm-hmm. Was the war ever to be avoided or not?
Well, that's a very rhetorical question, and I'm not sure, whether somebody could answer it properly. But what I would like to say is that, of course, the Kremlin is hell-bent on this story that the West, the collective West, is out to humiliate and destroy Russia. But, in reality, we're living in a world where countries should compete, by their technologies. Countries should compete by their innovations, not on the battlefield, not by conducting missile strikes at peaceful cities. Putin said in December 2021, he said that, he put forward an ultimatum for the Western nations. He said that you have to roll back the NATO alliance back to the level of 1997. Now, what did he achieve? Instead of making NATO smaller, he achieved that NATO will become bigger because new countries will join it now, as you know. So whether the war could have been avoided, it's a rhetorical question. But considering Russia's history of hate for Ukraine, sooner or later it would have happened.
Did Europe scare Putin, do you think?
Did Europe scare Putin? I think Europe actually surprised Putin in many respects because, probably one of the kind of strategic plans of Putin was that when he invades Ukraine, the Western Europe will kind of be afraid and will not support Ukraine. But look where we are now. I mean, almost without exception, every European country is firmly supporting Ukraine. Some countries provide us with military assistance. Some other countries provide with financial support. So I think, Putin didn't expect that the West would be united so much in supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, and Ukraine becoming an EU member, do you think that promise was maybe made a little bit too soon?
Well, I don't think it was made too soon. I think it was made too late. Because, Ukraine, we identify ourselves and have identified ourselves for centuries, like I said, with the European way of life. And we understand that there are certain issues that have to be overcome inside Ukraine, structural reforms, rooting out certain issues connected to corruption. We are aware of this. But by and large, Ukraine has always been part of Europe. So, we are very joyful that right now the process of Ukraine's European Union membership is discussed and is on the agenda of the European countries, and we will do everything possible to join EU as soon as possible.
Okay, let's go back to the situation today. There seems to be a new Russian offensive on the way. If Bakhmut should fall, then the road to Kramatorsk seems to be the next challenge for Russia. Do you see this happening?
I will just have to repeat again, I don't have the crystal ball, so I am unable to tell the future. But if we look back, I've said that for the last 6 months, Russians were unable to achieve any significant military success on the battlefield. They have made some incremental gains around the city of Bakhmut. They have gained control of the ruins of Soledar, which is next to Bakhmut, a small village. But they have not been successful. And there is, their military capability is exhausted. So there is very little they can probably pull out of their hat to kind of surprise the world and conduct a military offensive. Of course, they talk about it all the time. And, people around the world are expecting. And we actually, our military and political leadership also warns Ukraine as well as the world that Russians will probably attempt a large-scale offensive. But, whatever comes, we are prepared for it and we will defeat the Russians.
Yeah, of course, you don't have a crystal ball, but is the only outcome that Ukraine will win this war?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the only option for all of us, not just for Ukraine. Because, if God forbid, in some nightmare scenario, we imagine that the result of this war is different, then this will present a real serious risk for such countries as the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, because Putin will never stop in Ukraine. The overarching strategy of this crazy mad man is not to just destroy Ukraine. It is to reinstate the evil empire, to reinstate the grandiose Russian state. So this is why, everybody understands that this is not an option for all of us. And this is why the world stands with Ukraine. And this is why we will win.
I would like to discuss the figure of President Zelensky, because he has surprised many of us. Did he surprise the Ukraine army too?
Well, from the day one, he inspired the Ukrainian army, because you remember that during the first day of this large-scale invasion, when the missiles were flying over Kyiv, he said that he needs ammunition, not a ride, when he was offered to evacuate from Kyiv. So he's a president who was with his people throughout this war. He's a president who, on a daily basis, speaks to the Ukrainian people through his video addresses. He's the president who went to the front lines and met with soldiers, supported them in Bakhmut, in Kherson, and in other hotspots. So he's a true president of our country. He's a true leader. And it's a very well recognized fact worldwide. So, I wish him well, and I'm sure that he will take this country to victory.
He's in the picture a lot. He travels around. What if President Zelensky was to be neutralized?
Well, that's a very speculative question, and with your permission, I will not answer it.
Okay. So the soldiers, how can they turn into really high qualified soldiers in such a short period?
Well, look, right now, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are trained in foreign countries. Last year, for example, just the United Kingdom has trained 10,000 of Ukrainian soldiers, and this year they will train 20 more thousand. There are, hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers who are now undergoing training in the US, for example, on the Patriot air defense systems. Okay. There are soldiers who are training to use Bradley armored vehicles in Spain and in Poland. So it's an international effort, and it's a large international training camp in which the Ukrainian armed forces are being trained. And of course, we train them in Ukraine as well.
They are trained outside Ukraine as well, I hear you say?
Well, exactly. Some of the Ukrainian soldiers are trained outside of Ukraine, of course. And we hope that very soon Ukrainian pilots will be trained in European countries and maybe in the US to fly the fourth generation fighter jets. They're training to use tanks. And actually, when President Zelensky was in the United Kingdom last week, he visited the training facility where Ukrainian tank pilots are being trained to use Challenger 2 tanks.
Okay, and will these tanks and eventually the planes help the Ukraine in maybe winning the war? Is this an outcome?
Well, that's the plan. That's the plan. Our military command understands the situation on the battlefield very well, and this is why, our requests at this stage include main battle tanks, more armored vehicles, more heavy artillery, long-range missiles. I mean, this is one thing I forgot to mention, that this is one of the top priorities. We need long-range missiles because they will allow Ukrainian army to target the enemy, deeper into their, behind the front lines. So this would be very helpful.
How long can the Ukrainian army sustain the Russian bombings?
Until victory. There's nothing that will stop us. And despite the fact that it's difficult, and we are trying to improve our air defense capabilities. Our friends are supplying us with, for example, Sweden has pledged 30 Archer artillery systems. So they're all used very efficiently. But of course, we need to end this soon because this should not go forever.
And how is your morale?
My personal morale or the morale of the Ukrainian people? Or,
your personal morale.
My personal morale is as high as ever, because we are in a fighting mode. And we've been in the fighting mode for the last 12 months now.
Have you ever been back to visit your family?
Well, I see my family from time to time.
And what is the coming weeks going to look like for the Ukraine?
We have to be very careful because, as you remember, February 24th will mark 1 year since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. So we did have some warnings from our defense intelligence that on February 23rd and February 24th, we could expect, for example, massive missile strikes from Russia or intensification on the battlefield along the front lines. But like I said, we are prepared for any turn of events. And one thing I would like to stress is that timing is very, very important. Timing when it comes to the supply of Western weapons.
I have to ask this, Mr. Sak, but can Russia win this war?
No, it's impossible.
Okay. I would really like to thank you for this conversation, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Mr. Yuri Sak.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Business AM. Think forward.